Princess Nara stood alone on the cold metal platform of orbital station Zephyr, watching alien traders point at her like she was broken merchandise. Her silver scales, which should have gleamed bright under the station's harsh lights, looked dull and lifeless. Every few minutes, some wealthy alien would walk up, look her over, shake their head, and walk away. She had been standing there for 3 whole days now. The problem was simple but devastating for someone of royal blood. Nara couldn't phase shift. Every other member of the Kethmori Empire could slip between dimensions like stepping through doorways, but not her. To her people, this made her less than worthless. It made her broken. The royal doctors had tried everything when she was young, but nothing worked. Her parents had finally given up and decided to marry her off to whoever would take her. The auction master, a fat slug-like creature with too many eyes, kept announcing her dowry to anyone who would listen. 5 entire star systems filled with rare minerals and precious metals. Enough wealth to buy a small fleet of warships. Yet still, nobody wanted her. The few aliens who showed interest would ask about her condition, hear the truth, and immediately lose interest. Some even laughed. Nara tried to keep her chin up, but after 3 days of rejection, it was getting harder. She could hear the whispers from the crowd. Defective royalty. What's the point of a princess who can't even phase? Her children would probably be broken too. Each comment felt like a physical blow. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Jinwoo Park was having a busy day. The station always had refugees coming through, people running from wars or disasters on distant worlds. He had just finished treating a Rigelian trader who had been injured in a pirate attack when he noticed the commotion on the auction platform through his window. Jinwoo had been working as a combat medic for 8 years now, ever since he left Earth. He had seen all kinds of suffering, all kinds of people that society had given up on. Wounded soldiers, plague victims, refugees with nowhere to go. But something about the lone figure on that platform caught his attention. She wasn't crying or begging like many auction victims did. She just stood there with perfect posture, hands clasped in front of her, looking straight ahead. There was something noble about her stance, something that reminded him of his grandmother back on Earth. His grandmother had also been someone the world tried to throw away, but she had faced it all with the same quiet strength. Jinwoo found himself checking the window more often as he worked. Each time he looked, fewer aliens were gathered around the platform. The princess just kept standing there hour after hour as the crowd slowly lost interest. He could see her scales getting duller as stress took its toll on her alien biology. By the end of his shift, Jinwoo couldn't stop thinking about her. He had treated hundreds of patients who had been abandoned by their families, their governments, their entire species. There was something universal about that kind of loneliness that crossed all species barriers. It didn't matter if you had scales, fur, or skin. Being unwanted hurt the same way for everyone. That night, as he walked past the auction platform, on his way to his quarters, Jinwoo saw that Princess Nara was still there, still standing with that same dignified posture, even though she was completely alone now. The final hour of the auction had arrived, and Princess Nara felt her last bit of hope slipping away. The few remaining bidders were making jokes now, offering ridiculously low amounts just to insult her further. One particularly cruel alien offered the equivalent of what most people paid for a used speeder bike. The auction master looked embarrassed as he repeated these pathetic bids. Jinwoo had finished his medical shift, but found himself unable to leave. He kept watching through the window as the situation grew more humiliating for the princess. Her scales had developed dark patches where stress was literally eating away at her skin. As a medic, he recognized the symptoms immediately. Scale rot was dangerous for her species and could become life-threatening if left untreated. Something inside Jinwoo snapped when he heard a trader offer to buy her as a curiosity for his private zoo. Before he could think about what he was doing, he was walking toward the platform with his medical kit in hand. The crowd of aliens turned to stare at the human doctor approaching. "I invoke the ancient healer's right," Jinwoo announced loudly, his voice carrying across the platform. The auction master's many eyes blinked in confusion, but several older aliens in the crowd gasped in recognition. It was an old Kethmori, law that few remembered, allowing a healer to claim someone through an act of medical necessity rather than payment. The auction master started to object, but Princess Nara was already showing clear signs of medical distress. Her breathing was shallow, and the dark patches on her scales were spreading. Jinwoo stepped onto the platform and knelt beside her without asking permission. He could see she was close to collapsing. "Please hold still," he said gently, opening his medical kit. This might sting a little, but it should help. Nara stared at him in shock. No one had spoken to her with kindness in days. She watched as he pulled out what looked like simple human medical supplies, nothing fancy or high-tech. Just basic antiseptic and healing gel that any field medic would carry. When Jinwoo applied the antiseptic to her infected scales, something unexpected happened. The dark patches began to fade almost immediately. Her scales, which had been dull and lifeless for days, started to shimmer with their natural silver light. The crowd of aliens fell completely silent, staring in amazement. Jinwoo was just as surprised as everyone else. He had only intended to provide basic first aid, but somehow his simple human medicine was working better than anything the Kethmori royal physicians had ever tried. Within minutes, Princess Nara's breathing returned to normal, and her skin began to glow with healthy color. "How is this possible?" whispered one of the Kethmori delegates who had been ignoring the auction until now. Jinwoo honestly didn't know. He just kept working, cleaning and treating each affected area with the same gentle care he showed all his patients. As he worked, he noticed that Princess Nara was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. When he finished, Jinwoo did something that shocked everyone present, including himself. Instead of declaring ownership like the ancient law allowed, he looked directly into Princess Nara's eyes and asked, "Do you consent to this arrangement? Because if you don't want this, you can say no. I'll find another way to help you." Princess Nara's mouth fell open. In her entire life, no one had ever asked for her consent about anything. Royal marriages were business arrangements. Her opinion had never mattered to anyone. "You're asking what I want," she whispered, her voice hoarse from days of stress. "Of course," Jinwoo replied simply. "This is your life. You should have a choice in it." The watching aliens began murmuring among themselves. This was not how these arrangements usually worked. Jinwoo continued, "And just so we're clear, if you agree to this, you can leave whenever you want. This isn't a prison sentence. It's just a way to get you away from here safely." Princess Nara felt tears forming in her eyes for the first time in years. Jinwoo's medical ship wasn't much to look at from the outside. The converted frigate had seen better days, with patched hull plating and mismatched engines, but inside it was perfectly organized for emergency medical response. Princess Nara spent her first week aboard just trying to understand her new freedom. She could go anywhere on the ship, eat whatever she wanted, and most surprisingly, Jinwoo actually listened when she spoke. The first sign that something was different about Nara came during their routine jump through hyperspace. Most alien species experience some disorientation when traveling through dimensional folds, but Nara seemed completely unaffected. While Jinwoo felt the usual slight nausea that humans got during phase jumps, she sat calmly reading a medical textbook he had given her. "Doesn't the dimensional shifting bother you at all?" Jinwoo asked, genuinely curious. Nara looked up from her book, confused. "What shifting? Everything feels perfectly normal to me." Jinwoo realized this might be connected to her inability to phase shift. While other Kethmori could slip between dimensions, maybe that same condition made her more stable when dimensions were unstable. It was just a theory, but an interesting one. Their first real emergency call came 3 days later. A research station near the Void Nebula was under attack by quantum pirates, the worst kind of space criminals. These pirates used phase-shifting technology to appear and disappear at will, making them nearly impossible to fight. Most rescue ships wouldn't even attempt to help against quantum pirates, but Jinwoo had never been one to abandon people who needed medical help. As they approached the station, the pirates' ships flickered in and out of normal space, firing. At random intervals, Jinwoo struggled to plot a safe course through the chaos, but Nara was studying the attack pattern with intense focus. "They're not random at all," she said suddenly. "Look, They phase in for exactly 12 seconds, fire 3 shots, then phase out for 8 seconds before appearing somewhere else, but they always reappear within 100 meters of their last position. Jin-Woo stared at her in amazement. How can you see that pattern? I can barely track where they are. I don't know, Nara admitted. It just makes sense to me, like watching a dance with set steps. Using Nara's predictions, Jin-Woo was able to navigate safely to the research station and dock just as the pirates phased out for another cycle. They had exactly 8 seconds to get inside before the next attack. As Jin-Woo grabbed his emergency medical kit, while Nara followed with additional supplies. Inside the station, they found dozens of injured researchers and crew members. Some had been hurt by weapons fire, others by debris from damaged equipment. Jin-Woo immediately started treating the most critical cases, but he noticed something strange happening when Nara helped. Her touch seemed to stabilize patients in ways that his medicine alone couldn't. A researcher who had been phasing in and out of consciousness involuntarily suddenly became solid and stayed that way. Another victim whose cellular structure was breaking down from phase weapon exposure began healing rapidly when Nara held their hand. I think your condition isn't a disability at all, Jin-Woo said as they worked together. I think it's a completely different kind of ability. Working together, they developed new treatment methods on the spot. Jin-Woo's human medical knowledge combined with Nara's stabilizing effect created results neither of them could have achieved alone. They saved every single person on that station, including several who other doctors would have considered hopeless cases. Word of their success spread quickly through the medical community and beyond. A human doctor and a defective Kethmori princess had accomplished something that seasoned emergency teams with advanced equipment couldn't have done. Medical facilities across the galaxy started requesting their help with difficult cases. But their growing reputation also reached the Kethmori High Council, who were not pleased to learn that their discarded princess was making headlines across the galaxy. If Nara's condition was actually an advantage rather than a weakness, it changed everything about how they had treated her, and that was a problem they couldn't allow to continue. The message arrived on Jin-Woo's ship while they were treating refugees at a medical station near the Outer Rim. It was an official communication from the Kethmori High Council, written in the formal language that made everything sound like a threat. Princess Nara was required to return immediately. Her marriage to a human was declared invalid under ancient royal law, and she was accused of stealing state secrets by sharing royal medical knowledge with outsiders. Nara read the message 3 times before her hands started shaking. They want me back, she whispered to Jin-Woo. But not because they care about me. They're scared of what people might think if they see me succeeding. Jin-Woo put down the medical scanner he was holding and gave Nara his full attention. Over. The past few weeks, he had watched her transform from a frightened, abandoned princess into a confident partner who could save lives in ways no one else could. The thought of her going back to a people who had thrown her away made his chest tighten with anger. You don't have to go, he said firmly. We can figure this out together. But the Empire wasn't taking no for an answer. Within days, bounty hunters started showing up wherever their ship was spotted. These weren't ordinary criminals looking for quick money. These were professional trackers hired by the government, equipped with the best weapons and ships that Royal Treasury could buy. The first attack came while they were docked at a civilian port, loading medical supplies. Jin-Woo was in the cargo bay when he heard the unmistakable sound of phase weapons charging up. He grabbed his sidearm and ran toward the sound, finding Nara backed against a wall by 2 armored figures. Princess Nara of the Kethmori Empire. One of them announced through a voice modulator, "You will come with us peacefully." "She's not going anywhere," Jin-Woo said, stepping into view with his weapon drawn. What happened next surprised everyone, including Nara herself. As the bounty hunters raised their phase weapons, she instinctively reached out toward them. Suddenly their weapons flickered and died. The hunters themselves seemed to solidify, becoming unable to use their phase-shifting abilities to escape. "Can stop them from phasing," Nara said in amazement. "I can lock them in normal space." Jin-Woo didn't waste time being amazed. He quickly stunned both hunters with his weapon and started searching their equipment. What he found in their data files changed everything they thought they knew about Nara's condition. "These aren't just bounty hunters," Jinwoo said, reading through the encrypted files. They're working directly for someone in the royal family, and look at this medical report. The file contained Nara's childhood medical records, but these were different from the ones she had been shown growing up. According to these documents, her inability to phase shift wasn't a natural birth defect. It was the result of deliberate poisoning when she was just 6 months old. "Someone poisoned you," Jinwoo said, his voice filled with rage. "They damaged your phase-shifting ability on purpose." Nara stared at the evidence, pieces of her childhood finally making sense. She remembered being sick as a baby, remembered the long recovery, remembered how disappointed her parents seemed when she couldn't phase shift like other children. But it had never occurred to her that someone had done this to her intentionally. "The file says they were afraid of something called phase bridging," Jinwoo continued reading. "Apparently, some royal children are born with the ability to help others phase shift, which could unite the different castes in Kethmori society. Someone wanted to make sure you could never develop that ability. They poisoned a baby because they were afraid she might bring peace to their society," Nara said, her voice growing stronger with anger. "They destroyed my entire life to protect their political power." More bounty hunters kept coming, but each attack only made Nara stronger and more confident in her abilities. She learned to create stability fields that could ground entire ships, preventing any phase-based technology from working. Jinwoo taught her basic combat tactics, and she taught him how to use her abilities to enhance his medical treatments. Their partnership was becoming something deeper than friendship, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. But with each passing day, the Empire's pursuit grew more desperate and more dangerous. The mining colony of Kepler-7 was supposed to be their safe haven, a place so remote that even the Empire's bounty hunters wouldn't think to look for them. Jinwoo had arranged to provide medical services to the miners in exchange for fuel and supplies. It seemed like the perfect hiding spot until 3 Imperial warships dropped out of hyperspace directly above the colony. "They found us," Nara said, watching the ships through the colony's observation deck. Her voice was steady now, no longer the frightened princess who had stood on that auction platform months ago. Jinwoo was already planning their escape route when the colony's administrator, a gruff Kethmori named Kale, approached them with panic in his eyes. "Princess, you have to help us. The Imperial ships are demanding we surrender all our workers for questioning. They say anyone who helped you will be sent to the punishment phases." The punishment phases were a fate worse than death for any Kethmori. Criminals were locked in perpetual phase shifting, unable to exist fully in any reality, slowly going insane from the constant dimensional instability. Just hearing about it made the colony workers terrified. "We can't let them take innocent people," Jinwoo said immediately. "There has to be something we can do." Nara looked out at the 300 miners who had gathered in the colony's main cavern, all of them showing signs of fear. Most were from the lower castes, people who spent their lives shifting between dimensions to extract rare minerals from unstable space. They had hard lives and few rights, but they didn't deserve to suffer because they had helped her. "I have an idea," Nara said slowly, "but I'm not sure it will work on this many people at once." When the Imperial forces landed and began rounding up the miners, something extraordinary happened. As the soldiers tried to force the workers into phase restraints, Nara stepped into the center of the cavern and did something she had never attempted before. She expanded her stability field to cover the entire space. Suddenly, none of the Imperial soldiers could use their phase-based weapons or technology. Their armor, designed to shift between dimensions for protection, became solid and heavy. Their phase restraints stopped working entirely, but more importantly, the miners found themselves locked in normal reality for the first time in their lives. "I can feel my own thoughts," whispered one of the workers, a woman who had been phase shifting for 30 years. "They're not connected to the caste mind anymore." For the first time ever, these lower caste Kethmori could think as individuals. They weren't receiving the constant mental commands that told them where to work, how to think, and what to believe. The freedom was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at the same time. Jinwoo watched in amazement as Nara maintained the stability field while the miners experienced true independence. Some of them started crying. Others began talking to each other in ways they never had before, sharing personal thoughts instead of caste-approved communications. This is what they were afraid of, Nara realized. This is why they poisoned me, as a baby. They knew I could free people from the caste system, but maintaining the field was exhausting her. Jinwoo could see her starting to weaken, and there were still Imperial soldiers trying to break through. That's when he had an idea that would change everything. What if we could make this permanent? Jinwoo asked. What if we could give people the ability to resist phase control even when you're not around? Working together in the colony's medical bay, they developed something revolutionary. Using Jinwoo's knowledge of human neurology and Nara's understanding of phase biology, they created a simple treatment. It was just a modified version of the antiseptic that had first healed Nara's scales. But when injected into the nervous system of a Kethmori, it temporarily blocked their ability to phase shift. The first volunteer was Kale, the colony administrator. After the injection, he stood in normal reality for the first time since childhood, tears streaming down his face. "I can choose," he kept saying. "I can actually choose what to think." Word of the treatment spread through underground networks, faster than the Empire could track it. Lower caste workers on distant mining operations began requesting transfers to colonies where the treatment was available. Factory workers started organizing for the first time, no longer controlled by the phase mind of their supervisors. Within weeks, the Empire was facing something they had never encountered before: organized resistance from the bottom up. The High Council mobilized their entire fleet, but they were fighting an idea now, not just two fugitives. And ideas, Jinwoo knew from human history, were much harder to kill than people. Trading Station Harmony was supposed to be neutral territory, a place where all species could conduct business safely under galactic law. But when the Imperial Kethmori fleet arrived with 50 warships, neutrality became meaningless. They had tracked Jinwoo and Nara to this remote station at the edge of known space, and this time they weren't taking any chances. Jinwoo watched through the station's observation windows as the massive fleet surrounded them. There was nowhere to run. Their small medical ship was docked for repairs, and even if it had been ready, they couldn't outrun 50 military vessels. "They're not just here for us anymore," Nara said, studying the fleet formation. "Look at the troop transports. They're planning to occupy the entire station." The station's administrator, a nervous Centaurian named Vex, was practically begging them to surrender. "Please, just turn yourselves in. They're threatening to destroy the station if we don't hand you over. There are 10,000 innocent people here." Jinwoo felt the familiar weight of responsibility he had carried as a combat medic. Innocent people were in danger because of choices he had made. But before he could say anything, Nara placed her, hand on his arm. "We're not surrendering," she said firmly, "not when we're so close to giving people real freedom." The attack began at dawn, station time. Imperial phase fighters flickered in and out of normal space, firing at the station's defenses. Their strategy was simple: use their phase-shifting abilities to make themselves impossible to target, while systematically destroying the station's weapons and life support. But they hadn't counted on what Nara had become. Standing in the station's central hub, she closed her eyes and reached out with her abilities further than she ever had before. Instead of creating a small stability field around herself, she expanded it to cover the entire space around the station. Suddenly, all 50 Imperial ships found themselves locked in normal reality. The effect was immediate and devastating for the Imperial forces. Their phase fighters, designed to slip between dimensions, became sitting targets. Their weapons, which relied on phase-shifting technology, stopped working. Even their shields, which normally shifted out of phase to deflect attacks, became solid and vulnerable. "Impossible," breathed the station's defense coordinator. "She's grounded an entire fleet." Jinwoo didn't waste time being amazed. He immediately set up emergency medical stations throughout the station, knowing that casualties were inevitable once the real fighting began. But something unexpected started happening as word spread about what Nara had done. Kethmori crew members on the Imperial ships began abandoning their posts. Some stole escape pods and flew directly to the station, requesting asylum. Others sabotaged their own ships from the inside. Many of them had heard about the treatment that could free them from phase control. and they wanted that freedom for themselves. "We're receiving surrender requests from 12 Imperial ships," the station's communication officer announced in disbelief. Jinwu's medical bay quickly became much more than a treatment center. Defecting Imperial soldiers arrived seeking not just medical attention, but hope. They had spent their entire lives following orders from the Phase Collective, never able to think for themselves. Now they were choosing to risk everything for a chance at individual freedom. "Doctor, please," a young Kethmori soldier said, still wearing Imperial armor. "I want the treatment. I want to think my own thoughts." As Jinwu administered the anti-phase treatment to dozens of defectors, he realized they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. They weren't just running from the Empire anymore. They were actively fighting it, offering an alternative that people were willing to die for. Nara maintained her stability field for 6 hours straight, something that should have been impossible. The strain was enormous, but she drew strength from seeing former Imperial soldiers working alongside station security to defend their temporary home. Phase castes that had never mixed before were cooperating as equals for the first time in Kethmori history. The battle ended not with explosions, but with surrender. Half the Imperial fleet had either defected or been disabled by their own crews. The remaining ships, unable to use their phase-based advantages, were hopelessly outgunned by the station's conventional defenses and the defector ships that had joined them. Standing together on the station's command deck, Jinwu and Nara watched as the last Imperial ships retreated into hyperspace. Around them, hundreds of former Imperial soldiers were receiving their first treatments of freedom, while thousands more across the galaxy were preparing to join their cause. "We started a revolution," Nara said, still hardly believing it. Jinwu nodded, watching a group of ex-Imperial engineers working alongside human technicians to repair battle damage. "No," he corrected gently. "We gave people the tools to start their own revolution. That's much more powerful." The Galactic Council's intervention came 3 weeks after the Battle of Harmony Station, as news networks were calling it. Ambassador Thex, a pompous Rigelian who loved the sound of his own voice, arrived with a full diplomatic fleet and what he considered the perfect solution to end the growing conflict. "Princess Nara will return to the Kethmori Empire and accept rehabilitation," he announced during the peace talks. "In exchange, she will be granted a ceremonial position in the royal court and allowed to marry the human doctor, provided their children undergo proper phase conditioning from birth." Jinwu felt his blood pressure spike as he listened to the proposal. They were treating Nara like a problem to be managed, not a person with her own rights. Worse, they wanted to ensure that any children they might have would be forced into the same phase collective system that had controlled Nara's people for centuries. "Absolutely not," Nara said before Jinwu could respond. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had learned to command starship battles and lead refugees to safety. "I will not return to a system that poisons babies to maintain political control." Ambassador Thex looked annoyed. "Princess, you must understand the greater good. Your rebellion has destabilized an entire sector. Thousands of Kethmori are abandoning their duties, seeking this treatment of yours. The Empire's economy is collapsing without proper phase workers." "Good," Jinwu said bluntly. "Maybe they'll have to start treating people like individuals instead of tools." The peace talks collapsed within hours. The Galactic Council, unwilling to openly support a revolution that might inspire similar movements in other systems, declared the matter an internal Kethmori affair. They washed their hands of the entire situation, leaving Jinwu and Nara to face the Empire's wrath alone. But they weren't really alone anymore. Word of their cause had spread across the galaxy, attracting not just Kethmori refugees, but outcasts from dozens of species. When they announced plans to establish a free colony on Kepler 9, an unclaimed world in disputed space, volunteers came from everywhere. The planet was harsh but livable, with vast open plains under a purple sky. More importantly, it was far enough from Imperial space that they could build something new without constant interference. Jinwu helped design the colony's medical facilities, while Nara worked on creating permanent stability fields that would protect the settlement. The first settlers were mostly Kethmori who had received the anti-phase treatment, but they were soon joined by others. Humans who had been blacklisted by their own government for political dissent. Centaurians who had been cast out for refusing arranged marriages. Rigelian, scientists whose research had been suppressed by their academies. All of them were people who had been told they didn't fit in somewhere else. Jinwoo found himself training a new generation of medics from multiple species. His techniques, combined with Nara's stabilizing abilities, could treat conditions that had been considered incurable. They developed new medicines that worked across species barriers and surgical techniques that didn't rely on any single race's technology. "We're not just treating medical problems," he told his students during one training session. "We're proving that cooperation works better than control." The Empire's response was predictable. 3 separate invasion fleets were sent to reclaim the stolen colony. Each one failed more completely than the last. Nara's abilities had grown, stronger with practice and confidence. She could now create stability fields that covered entire continents, making it impossible for Imperial forces to use their phase-based advantages. But the real weapon against the Empire wasn't Nara's powers. It was the example they were setting. News broadcasts showed former enemies working together to build schools and hospitals. They showed Kethmori children playing with human kids, all of them free to think their own thoughts and make their own choices. The love story between Jinwoo and Nara became a symbol that resonated across species lines. Here was a human who had seen worth in someone everyone else had abandoned. Here was an alien princess who had chosen love and freedom over wealth and power. Their wedding, broadcast across the galaxy despite Imperial attempts to jam the signal, was watched by billions. "They keep asking me about being married to an alien," Jinwoo told Nara after one particularly annoying interview with a human news network. "As if being different species is the weirdest thing about our situation." Nara laughed, a sound that had become more frequent as she learned to trust her own happiness. "They don't understand that the species thing is the easy part. It's the revolution that's complicated." By the end of their first year on Kepler 9, the colony had grown to over 50,000 residents. More importantly, it had become proof that the Empire's way wasn't the only way. Freedom was messy and sometimes difficult, but it was also beautiful and powerful, and worth fighting for. The success of Kepler 9 created a problem that Jinwoo and Nara had never expected. Within 6 months, 12 other worlds had declared independence from the Kethmori Empire, all of them asking for guidance on how to set up their own free societies. Suddenly, 2 people who had just wanted to be left alone found themselves responsible for the hopes and dreams of millions. "We can't make decisions for entire planets," Jinwoo said during one of their late-night planning sessions. "That's exactly the kind of centralized control we fought against." Nara agreed completely, but the practical challenges were overwhelming. Each world had different needs, different species mixes, and different problems with their transitions away from imperial control. Some had been mining colonies with mostly lower caste workers. Others were research stations with mixed populations. A few were agricultural worlds that had never seen conflict before. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yuki, one of Jinwoo's former medical students, suggested adapting the triage system used in emergency medicine. "We prioritize based on need and available resources," she explained. "We don't try to control everything centrally. We just make sure everyone has the basic tools they need to help themselves." This led to the creation of the Free Worlds Council, a loose federation where each world governed itself, but shared resources and knowledge with the others. Jinwoo insisted that the medical principles he had learned in combat zones should form the foundation of their laws. Do no harm, help those who need it most, and always get informed consent before taking action. The council system was messy and sometimes inefficient, but it worked. Representatives from each world, both phased and non-phased beings, met regularly to discuss common problems and share solutions. Decisions were made by consensus rather than decree, which meant lots of arguments, but also meant that everyone felt heard. Jinwoo found himself in the strange position of being a political leader when all he had ever wanted to be was a doctor. But he approached governance the same way he approached medicine. Study the problem, consider all options, and choose the treatment that would help the most people with the least harm. Meanwhile, Nara was discovering abilities she never knew she had. Not just her phase-stabilizing powers, but leadership skills that had been suppressed her entire life. She could bring together groups that had been enemies for generations, helping them find common ground through her unique perspective as someone who had been rejected by everyone. The Empire's response was swift and brutal. The High Council assembled, the largest fleet in Kethmori history, over 200 warships, determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. They called it the Restoration Fleet, claiming they were bringing order back to chaos. The final battle took place in the space around Kepler-9, with the entire galaxy watching through news broadcasts. Imperial propaganda had promised a quick victory against the deluded rebels and their alien puppet masters. Instead, they got the shock of their lives. As the battle began, Nara expanded her stability field to cover the entire battlefield. But this time, something different happened. Instead of just preventing Imperial ships from phase shifting, she somehow made it possible for individual crew members to choose for themselves whether to remain connected to the phase collective. For the first time in their lives, thousands of Imperial soldiers could think independently while still serving on their ships. The effect was immediate and devastating to Imperial morale. Ship after ship began reporting technical difficulties as crews chose to disable their own weapons rather than fire on civilians. Admiral Keth, commanding the Imperial fleet from his flagship, watched in horror as his own bridge crew began questioning their orders. "Sir, are we really going to destroy entire colonies full of families?" his tactical officer asked. It was the first time anyone had ever questioned him directly. By the end of the battle, over half the Imperial fleet had either surrendered or joined the Free World's forces. The remaining ships retreated in disorder, their commanders unable to understand how their perfectly disciplined crews had suddenly developed individual consciences. The aftermath was even more remarkable than the battle itself. Instead of demanding unconditional surrender from the defeated Imperial forces, Nara offered them the same choice she had given everyone else: stay and help build something better, or leave and find their own path to freedom. Most chose to stay. Even some of the Imperial officers, once they experienced life without the constant pressure of the Phase Collective, decided they preferred thinking for themselves. The coronation ceremony took place 3 months later, not in some grand palace but in the middle of Kepler-9's main settlement. Nara was elected by popular vote from all the free worlds, becoming the first Kethmori leader chosen by the people rather than inherited through bloodline. Jinwu stood beside her during the ceremony, not as a consort or royal husband, but as her partner in the truest sense. They had built something together that neither could have achieved alone, a society based on consent, cooperation, and the radical idea that everyone deserved the right to choose their own destiny. 5 years after the Battle of Kepler-9, the Free Kethmori Federation had grown into something that surprised even its founders. What started as a single refugee colony had become a thriving alliance of 47 worlds, home to over 1 billion beings from dozens of different species. The success story was being studied in universities across the galaxy. But for Jinwu and Nara, the most important changes were much more personal. Their twin children, Hana and Kai, were 3 years old and already showing abilities that amazed their parents daily. Unlike any Kethmori children before them, they could choose when to phase shift and when to remain solid. More importantly, they could help other children make the same choice, creating small stability fields during playtime that let kids from different species interact safely. "Watch this, Papa," Hana said one morning, reaching out to touch a Centaurian child who was flickering between dimensions due to a rare medical condition. The moment her small hand made contact, the other child stabilized, giggling with delight. At being able to play normally for the first time in months, Jinwu watched in wonder as his daughter unconsciously did what the greatest Kethmori healers had never managed. She wasn't forcing the child to be stable, she was simply offering the option, letting them choose how they wanted to exist in that moment. The children's nursery on Kepler-9 had become a model for the entire galaxy. Kids from species that had been enemies for centuries played together daily, learning that differences weren't something to fear, but something to celebrate. Human children taught Kethemori kids how to laugh at silly jokes. Rigelian youngsters showed everyone else how to build impossible structures with blocks. Centaurian children shared their ability to see colors that other species couldn't even imagine. They're growing up thinking cooperation is normal, Nara observed, watching their son Kai help a group of mixed-species children build a fort together. They can't imagine a world where people are separated by what they can or can't. Do Jinwoo nodded, remembering his own childhood on Earth, where differences often led to bullying and exclusion. Maybe that's what real progress looks like. Not just changing laws or governments, but raising a generation that sees things differently from the start. The medical advances coming out of the Federation had revolutionized healthcare across the galaxy. Jinwoo's training programs had produced thousands of multi-species medics who could treat conditions that had previously been considered hopeless. The combination of human adaptability, Kethemori phase biology, and techniques borrowed from dozens of other species had created a new standard of care. But it wasn't just about medicine. The Federation's universities were producing scientists, engineers and artists who thought across species lines. Their spaceships were designed by teams that included the best minds from everywhere, resulting in vessels that were more efficient and safer than anything built by single-species governments. The Aun, old Kethemori Empire still existed, but it was a shadow of its former self. Many of its most productive worlds had joined the Federation, and those that remained were struggling with brain drain as their best people emigrated to places where they could think freely. The High Council had been forced to loosen their phase control policies just to keep their society functioning. Sometimes I think about that auction platform, Nara said one evening as they watched their children play in the garden outside their simple home. About how hopeless everything seemed back then. Jinwoo took her hand, marveling at how her scales now shimmered constantly with health and happiness. I think about it too. But not the hopeless part. I think about how you never gave up on yourself, even when everyone else had. Their love story had become legend across the galaxy, but not in the way they had expected. It wasn't celebrated as some grand romance between a prince and princess. Instead, it had become a symbol of something much more powerful, the idea that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and given a chance to become who they're meant to be. Documentary crews came regularly to interview them, always asking the same questions about how they had managed to change the galaxy. Jinwoo's answer was always the same. We didn't change anything. We just refused to accept that people were disposable. The real measure of their success wasn't in the size of their federation or the power of their military. It was in the small moments. A former Imperial soldier teaching human children how to play a Kethemori game. Refugees from different worlds sharing meals and stories. Children growing up bilingual in languages their parents had never heard. On quiet nights, Jinwoo and Nara would sit together and watch the stars, knowing that on worlds throughout the galaxy, families were going to sleep safe and free because two people had once refused to accept that anyone was beyond saving. Their legacy wasn't just political or medical. It was the radical idea that love and acceptance could be more powerful than any weapon or technology.